Alrighty, in that last video I gave a demonstration of one possible way to teach people the genetic code. Now, clearly what I'm advocating for is heresy. It's a strong advocacy for heresy. Now, most people will recognize that heretics are going to get in trouble. So if you're a professional scientist and you try and pull this shit, you're going to get in trouble. They're going to come after you. They're going to come after your license. They're going to come after your job because that's what they do. This is a cult. All right. There's a big difference between an amateur scientist. See, I'm free to think and say and do whatever I want. They can't touch me. Professional scientists can't do that. So if you're an 8th grade science teacher and you try and pull this stunt, they're going to get pissed. All right. And if you're if you're a homeschooler, if you're trying to teach your kids the truth, you're going to get your kids in trouble because they're going to ask simple questions on tests. Your kids are going to give the right answers. They're going to get marked off as wrong. Okay, so it's not that it's not about proof. Okay, this is about belief. I mean, here's what they did. They said, all right, we got this thing. We used it to make this thing, and that gave us this thing. This thing here is the genetic code. Okay, they used the double helix to generate the codon table, and the codon table created their code. All right, that's their paradigm. This is their paradigm. I say, no, don't use this, use this. So now we have an alternate paradigm. This is a better paradigm. They say, well, prove it. All right. There and there. I just mathematically proved the paradigm, okay? This isn't a theory, it's a mathematical fact. You can use this paradigm if you want to and do all this toxic crap that you're already doing, but you can also use this paradigm and you can mathematically do this crap and it's not toxic, okay? This is not a theory. This is a mathematical fact. So now what we've got is we have two competing paradigms. And the question is, which one are we going to use? Well, the answer is we're going to use the one that's true, that actually works, that doesn't cause us to say stupid shit and to think stupid shit. Okay? Well, they say it's not about proof, it's about permission. You don't have permission to do that. Well, where do I go to get permission? Where's the emperor who's currently wearing no clothes, who I need to convince that they're stupid? Well, that's a good question. I haven't found that guy yet. But the higher up you go, the more upset they get. Well, what they're really doing is they're teaching their paradigm, and their paradigm, what they're teaching is pure ignorance. Okay? I'm teaching heresy, which I'm proud of. And they're teaching ignorance, which they're proud of. They wear it like a badge of honor. They say, oh, this is just philosophy. I don't care about philosophy. Oh, this is all the same thing. You don't understand science. There's exceptions to every rule. What they've done is they've created this temple of ignorance, and it comes in all of these different forms, and they weave it together in this airtight, diamond-hard explanation of why it's okay to be ignorant. All right, what this is they made an ad hoc description, and then they fall back on superstition to support it. They say, look, we don't need to know this. It's like, well, if you don't need to know it, then quit teaching it. Just quit teaching it. Okay, so when they go through and they teach this thing, they're demonstrating this profound ignorance. Well, it comes in all these different forms. The first thing they're ignorant of is their own paradigm. They don't even know what they're saying. Okay? They're totally ignorant that there's an alternative paradigm. They don't know about this, and they don't want to know about this. Okay? So they're ignorant of their paradigm. But then that goes into the ignorance of symmetry. Okay, well, if you don't know symmetry, if you don't know anything about symmetry, then there's no possible chance that you can understand the genetic code because it's pure symmetry. Okay, you have to use symmetry to explain it if you don't understand symmetry. And then it's just symmetry everywhere you look. So that gets in. If you don't know symmetry, you don't know logic. They don't know that. They don't care about logic. Okay? They're ignorant of the experimental data. All right. They use these logical incoherences, and then they ignore all the experimental data. All of the data, every time they do an experiment, it refutes this and proves this. So they're ignorant of math. They say, 4 times 4 times 4, that's all you need to know. They're totally ignorant of information theory. They use the words, but they don't use the ideas. They don't understand the ideas. They don't understand what information is. They don't understand what codes are. So they call it a code, but they don't treat it like a code. The most important thing is to realize it is a code. That's all you need to know to become the world's leading expert in the genetic code. It really is a code. They're ignorant of geology, biology. It totally screws up the whole idea of biology. And they're ignorant of science. It's a science-free science paradigm. So if you're trying to teach this stuff, you got to be warned you're going to get in trouble by teaching the truth. So we'll just go down the list of things that they are willing to say that are either true or false based on their paradigm. Well, they say it's simple. That's false. This is simple, but this is complex. It's the most complex thing in the world. They say it's linear. This is linear. This is nonlinear. Okay. I say it's perfectly symmetrical. They would say that's false. It's not. Their codon table is not perfectly symmetrical. So they get that wrong. Here's the most important thing. Okay, they say that this thing is fully determined. What that means is that there's no missing pieces, there's no extra pieces. It's all wrapped up in this paradigm. Fully determined. Like gravity is fully determined. Quantum mechanics is underdetermined. In other words, there are things that we don't know. So we deal with those as probabilities. So that's where we get into information theory. So this is fully determined. This is underdetermined. Now what that leads to is they then see this as static. In other words, it's fixed. It's fully determined and it's static. I'm saying it's underdetermined, and therefore you need to animate it. You need to animate it through time, and you need to animate it through space. It's an underdetermined animated code. It's probabilistic, and it operates on multiple scales of time and space. It is a temporospatial code. The information in it is purely spatial, and we have to animate the spatial information to derive the actual information. So it's an underdetermined animated code. They're saying it's a fully determined static code. They say there's 4 nucleotides. That is ignorance of experiment. Okay, there's 4 in DNA. There's another one in mRNA, and then there's another one in tRNA. There's 6 nucleotides at least. I'm saying that we don't know how many nucleotides there are. There's an infinite number of nucleotides. The nucleotides are not the variables. The nucleotides are the values that go into the variables. Same thing with amino acids. They say there's 20 amino acids. We know that's false. There's more than 20 amino acids. Okay? And we don't know how many there are or could be. We can guess that going back through time, what we consider to be an amino acid, the early code might have used molecules that we wouldn't even recognize as amino acids or nucleotides. There's no way these nucleotides were just laying around. They say there's 64 codons. Well, that's an ignorance of logic. That's a logical incoherence because they're going from 64 to 96 to 125. If you mathematically treat the double helix, okay, properly, there's 128 codons in the double helix. If you assume 4 nucleotides for one strand, okay, mathematically, this is like a symmetry operation. Okay, you rotate it once, you rotate it twice. You have to count all of those rotations. So there's 64 on one strand, there's 64 on the other. So there's 128 in the double helix. That's just pure logic. Okay, you can't say there's 64 and then start talking about all these other codons. That's stupid. There are 20 codons. Okay, there's 20 variables. The instantiations are different from the actual codons. Codon's a variable. 3 nucleotides is an instantiation of that. They basically jump the shark, run off the rails immediately because they think it's a 1-to-1 code. It's fully determined. Okay, they say there's 1 codon, there's 1 amino acid. This is totally false. Okay, there's one codon in your cytoplasm that it assigns one amino acid, and in your mitochondria it assigns another. So there's not even a one-to-one relationship in your own body. So what it is there's many codons and there's many amino acids. There's many of this, many of that. Everywhere you look, it's a many to many relationship. It's not a one-to-one relationship. Well, then they get into this bizarre idea, totally bizarre, that molecular information is one-dimensional because of this one-to-one relationship. Well, that's just insane. Molecular information. There's no one-dimensional molecule in the universe. Molecular information is spatial. So they say sequence determines structures. Well, that's logically incoherent. That's false just by saying it. Okay? It's true to say that structure determines sequence. So all of the sequences that we see in the genetic code are derived from their structure. The structure of the code determines the sequences. So they're this one-dimensional idea is ignorant of paradigm, symmetry, logic, experiment, math, information, chemistry. I mean, when you say sequence determines structure, what you're doing is you're openly stating an ignorance of all concepts of math and science, and proud of it. You think it's cute. It's an aphorism. Okay. They believe that the double helix is what builds the table. So they start with the double helix, and they say this is how we derive our table, and we could derive all these other kind of tables from it. Well, that's just false. Okay. The double helix, there was no double helix when this thing got started. There were no nucleotides. Okay, the table, the logic, the math of the table is what builds the double helix. The logic of the table is what builds the codon table. Okay, you've got to start with the logic to create the molecules. The genetic code builds the double helix. The genetic code builds the codon table. Okay, the double helix does not build the codon table. Well, and then this gets into, they think that the genetic code only explains protein synthesis. No, that's false. The genetic code explains all of life. So as a part of that, the genetic code must explain protein synthesis. And quite clearly, the complexity of the code simplifies down to a point where protein synthesis must occur. So, protein synthesis is a subset of what the genetic code does. It's not the cause of the genetic code. It's a result. They've got cause and effect. So the genetic code itself is a big code, and the effect of it is this smaller code that is protein synthesis. But the same code has to explain life and ontogeny and phylogeny and everything. And as a result, it will explain protein synthesis. They say a protein can fold in only one way. That's just false. That is ignorance of experiment. That's ignorance of logic. Logically, we know that's false. Experimentally, we know that we can do a silent mutation, get two proteins. We have chaperone proteins that help them fold. Why would we need them if they only fold? There's prions that are misfolded proteins. The protein itself doesn't have a single shape. Its allosteric function is derived from the fact that it's changing its shape. So to say that a protein can only fold in one way is just logically incoherent, experimentally false. But to use that as an aphorism, sequence determines structure. These are all interconnected falsehoods that merely reinforce each other and make it so hard to crack the shell of this delusion that this is a simple linear thing. Oh, God. There's more information in nucleotides than there is in amino acids. That's just stupid. That's an ignorance of logic, math, information theory. Okay? The nucleotides in the double helix, that's a set of 4. Okay? The amino acids in protein, that's a set of 20. So right out of the gate, we know that there's more information in the amino acids than there are in the nucleotides. So the information, the idea of the code is to decompress. The information is the most highly compressed spatial temporal information in the universe. That's the double helix. Well, we unpack that when we make proteins, and each step of the process unpacks it a little bit more. It's a fractal. So by the time you get these proteins, now you create these flocks or colonies of proteins. I mean, this information just explodes. It's incomprehensible how much information's there. It's comprehensible how much information's in the DNA. That's because it's so highly compressed, but it's being decompressed. Okay, this is just a total ignorance of information. The data is universal. So they're saying that this data in this table is universal. This is false. We know this is false. Okay, different organisms have different data. There's not one set of data for all the organisms. Okay, the logic is universal. Okay, the code is universal. The data table that we the simplest possible data table that we can generate from this code is this. That's universal. The table's universal. The molecules are not universal. The molecules are being recruited, they're being evolved across all of life. Now, life is going to use the same basic structure because the code has to be symmetrical. All right, so it's a network. The language, the actual molecules have to be shared by the entire network. That's why they're all so similar. Okay, it's not universal. It's not arbitrary. Okay, they look at this pattern and say it's arbitrary. It's because they miss the symmetry. Well, if you see the symmetry, then you can see it's not arbitrary, and you can see that the symmetry is part of the information because it's got to be animated. All right, it's the least arbitrary thing in the universe. It's the most symmetrical thing. It's the most complex symmetry you'll ever see. It's a complex code. So the information that is derived from it is very, very complex, but it's using those sequence symmetries for actual information functions. These are search functions, okay? If you don't have the symmetry, you can't do the search. Got to have the symmetry before you can do the search. They say that this code is prevented from evolving. That's the single dumbest thing I've ever heard, okay? The code of all life is prevented from evolving. It's the code itself that's evolving, okay? The code starts simpler, and by simpler I mean bigger. There's more molecules. As it becomes more complex, it becomes more compact. So what we're seeing here is it's a machine learning process. So what it's learning is the smallest possible code, the fewest possible molecules. So if we stretch our minds back, what we need to do is not imagine fewer molecules. That would be harder to do. It would be easier to have more molecules and let them all compete to be the smallest set of molecules. So, I mean, you can't understand this code if you believe, which they do. This causes you to believe that there's a functional imperative. The only imperative is that there's a logic that does this. That's the functional imperative. This is the logic. This is the functional imperative. The function is to operate this code. That's the functional imperative. And that means in order to do that, it must evolve. So they got that exactly backwards. They say there's a functional imperative, therefore it can't evolve. No, there's a functional imperative, therefore it must evolve. So, when you get these guys and these professional scientists, the higher they get up in the chain, the more invested they are in this. And the one thing that they can't have is you can't challenge their authority. All right, if you even question their knowledge or the validity of their knowledge or the actual information content of their knowledge, they get really pissed. Okay, just like they always do. It's a cult. It's a church. It's a dogma. It's a ritual. They have these holy relics, and you have to kiss the ring, and otherwise they'll kill you. They'll call you names. They'll remove you from active duty, or you're off. You're out of a job. They won't give you grants. They won't listen. They won't publish your papers. Okay, this is a totalitarian regime. They will lock you out. And you say, what about truth? They say, piss on the truth. That's not important. What's important is my power. My power You're not going to sit here and challenge my power. This is exactly like what the Mayans used to do. You know, some jackass would stumble in from the field and he would question the authority. They'd cut his damn heart out. Well, that's a message. Okay, these people that are harvesting the wheat or whatever, they don't give a shit about science. What they care about is they just cut that guy's heart out. Well, that's what they're doing now. Across the board, they'll say something silly. Oh, a man can become a woman. Well, if you don't agree with it, if you don't start dithering about your pronouns, they'll friggin' fire you. Well, just think what they'd do if you started spouting this stuff. Okay, this is total heresy. It just happens to be true. Okay? Well, they don't give a shit about that. All right, so what we've got here is we've got this stupid paradigm that's false. All you can do is demonstrate your ignorance, say false things. We have an alternative paradigm, okay? You don't like this paradigm? Invent your own damn paradigm, okay? Get rid of this one, realize that this is bad, now we need a new one. Well, here's a new one, this is an alternative. Now our ignorance is clearing up. Oh, you mean there's options? Yeah, there's thousands of options. You know, I'd come up with a different paradigm. You don't like this one? I'll come up with a different one. You come up with one, okay? But let's start trying to find a paradigm that's true, that says true things. Let's get rid of the paradigm that says false things, okay? And then we can start discussing it. You know, let's have a debate. I am the world's leading expert on the genetic code. If you think you are, then come over here. I'm just some jackass that stumbled in and out of the field. I'm easy to kill. If you're the world's leading expert, you come in here. You know, I'm going to ask you some simple questions like, how many codons are there? Well, you're not going to be able to answer them because you're ignorant. You're confused. You're passing your ignorance and your confusion onto these children. Stop. Okay? So, yeah, I hope that helps. I hope if you're a professional 8th grade science teacher or a homeschooler, I mean, just teach your kids when they get a test, tell them to pick the worst answer. That one will be correct every time. So you can do both. You can follow the rules and play the game and know and also know that it's bullshit. And you can also be a more powerful scientist because we can explore some really hard ideas. These are easy ideas, okay? But we can use this to explore some hard ideas. And when we do, we find out a lot of what the scientists are saying now is just wrong. It's false. I mean, my favorite one is, oh, all life descended from a single cell. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's mathematically impossible. That's logically incorrect. It's false. It doesn't help us explain what life's doing. But that's because we're using this paradigm. It's just a reflection of this paradigm. There's no way that all life descended from a single cell. There's no way that these last common ancestors are not nearly as important as what they're saying. You know, what's more important is to see this in a broad term. So there's a lot of stuff that we can go into, and we will in more videos. But I just wanted to start out by saying, look, what are the uses of this new paradigm? Well, the first use is we can teach kids a proper understanding of the genetic code. Well, okay, that's going to cause trouble because you're not allowed to do that. You don't have permission to do that. I'm giving you permission. I'm the world's leading expert. If they say, who gave you permission to do that? Say, the world's leading expert. Some jackass who just stumbled in and out of the field and started saying crazy shit. That's who I am. Those are my credentials. I'm a heretic. But then, once we go past the simple stuff, when we get into the hard stuff, that's when stuff really starts to get interesting. So we'll do that in some future videos.